Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 115 has the dual job of establishing Vivi's relationship with the Straw Hats as a temporary member, and of course, setting the table for the tragic tale of Little Garden. A constant need in One Piece is splitting up the crew so that they can each have adventures and be characters without being reduced to supporting cast for whoever happens to be the most powerful person present. So Oda will, over and over again, contrive reasons for the crew to be split up in various ways. So off goes Luffy on an adventure with Vivi, Zoro and Sanji get into a hunting contest, and Vivi and Usopp stay behind on the ship because they're scared. It's a simple, character-driven way to set that narrative up, but it's also just good writing craft. This is how you do that kind of thing. As for a best panel, well, the Going Merry sailing into Little Garden for the first time is a technical tour de force. Look at all that rendering and the scale of it all. The dark shadow sneaking up on Nami and Usopp is wonderfully creepy and well composed, but my favorite is this one. It's just an exposition panel, but look at how Oda is using Karu's black tail feathers to outline and back Vivi in the panel, making her stand out and lending gravitas to the exposition that she's delivering. It's not spectacular, but it's very good craft. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 116 introduces us to Dorry and Broggy. They seemed at the time to just be funny throwaway characters, wild, exotic archetypes that the crew would encounter once and never again, but oh my, here goes Oda with his long-term planning. This chapter sets up their 100-year grudge match and revels in the absurdity of it. One Piece is about this in some ways. It's not about whether a dream or principle or goal is achievable or even rational. If you believe in something to the core of your soul and commit to it with everything you have, then that is what a meaningful life is, even if it kills you. And certainly, the giant splash page clash between Dorry and Broggy is a strong contender for the best panel. There's an amazing sense of scale here, wild and overwhelming power, and Oda and his assistants render the hell out of it too. Look at all those jungle plants getting thrown around. But I actually like this panel better. Broggy looming over the Going Merry like that. It's such a good composition, and with the human figures of Nami and Usopp in the picture, the sense of scale gets even more visceral and obvious. This panel really gives you a sense of how huge a giant is. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 117 establishes the peril of the Little Garden storyline, which is the machinations of Mr. 3, who gets a genuinely hilarious introduction panel telling off Miss Golden Week for using his secret codename in public while wearing a giant number 3 directly on his head. It's simple, but it makes me snigger. Usopp gets a moment of character here, declaring his heartfelt desire to become a great warrior like the giants of Elbaf, a setup which is only going to take, 24 years to start paying off in the actual story. Jesus Christ, Oda. The best panel, though? It's Dorry, after drinking the booby-trapped ale, looming over Vivi and Luffy. Again, it's the scale that really works here, but Oda and his team also make an interesting choice in the rendering here, darkening Dorry almost to the point of a Frank Miller's Sin City-esque linoleum starkness. It's all to communicate the impending danger of his vengeance, of course, which it does very successfully, but it also does a good job of communicating just how hurt he is. He looks dangerous here, sure, but also gaunt and kind of hollow like a corpse rising from its grave. Menace and vulnerability in equal measure. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 118 is all about escalating the tension and getting Luffy invested in kicking the bad guy's ass. Poor Dorry, even with his stomach exploded, puts up a fight against Luffy who, and this is a nice bit of storytelling, manages to prove his innocence to Dorry by beating him in a fight. I like that that's something that's treated seriously by the story. This is what the giants believe in. Most of the chapter, though, is about making us hate Mr. 3 enough that it'll be really satisfying to see him get his ass kicked. To that end, I really like this panel where he takes a deep and grotesque sniff of his tea while discussing the bounties on Broggy and Dorry. There's a real sense of a gross scumbag smelling out a big score here. But the best panel, at least for my money, is this one, with Mr. 3 lounging in a wax chair, drinking his tea and reading, because there's so much character in there, in his posing and his affect. You see that and you clock this man instantly. You know exactly why you would find him unpleasant. God help you if you ever sit next to this piece of work at a party. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 119 is a downer, quite frankly. It's the part of the story where the villain's plans are working and everything is going wrong. It's the tumble into despair that makes success all the sweeter. So Dorry goes off to fight Broggy despite his injuries, Zoro and Nami get captured by Mr. 3's fake wax figures, Luffy gets trapped under a huge skull so he can't stop Dorry fighting, and Mr. 3 interferes with the giants' duel even further, denying them their freedom to settle the fight on their own terms, so the outcome will be more favorable to him personally. Luffy, in particular, is infuriated by that, but so is Usopp, who is more and more looking to the Giants' honor code as a vision for his future. He gets the best panel of the chapter as well. We get first this tilted shot of him waxing poetic about his dreams of being a brave warrior of the sea, which cuts beautifully then to Nami dragging him off into the jungle full of dinosaurs to actually go deal with a situation. Usopp is escaping into fantasy to avoid having to deal with the present horrors, and that's very funny, and more than a little relatable. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 120? Well, like I said, this is the downward spiral of despair, so the chapter itself is mostly a bummer parade of Broggy weeping for Dorry after seemingly having killed him, poor Usopp and Luffy and Karoo getting abused by Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, and Broggy himself getting trapped and humiliated by Mr. 3. And even the best panel is kind of a grim one. After Broggy lands the final blow, a geyser of blood explodes over the tree line. The brutality of what has happened is visible for miles around. And there's Usopp, Vivi, and Luffy seeing it. The angle here is low, our eye level is below even Luffy's, and look how the comic curves the ground, hatching the lines roughly, and look how the clouds and the skull trapping Luffy even seem to fish-eye themselves, as though the world itself is distorting, leaning in to look at this monumental moment. Imagine this same scene but with a neutral camera and geometrically perfect ground. It wouldn't feel as big, as impactful, or as tragic. It's a good application of craft. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 121 is, well, still the bummer parade. Nami, Zoro, and Vivi are captured and put on Mr. 3's freaky Halloween candle cake to slowly choke to death, while Broggy despairs at learning the truth of how he beat Dorry. But this is also when little glimmers of hope start to show. Broggy nearly breaks out of Mr. 3's wax, visibly scaring him, and this is that little crack in the armor of arrogant invincibility that so often shows up in One Piece's villains right before they lose. And then there's the best panel, or rather panels, because there's kind of two of them. Mr. 5 tells Luffy that they've captured Zoro, and Luffy casually tells him, "Then you're doomed." He has absolute faith in his vice captain. Later, Mr. 5 tells Zoro that they killed Luffy, and he just looks away and grins because he knows for sure that no, they absolutely did not. It's a small thing, but it's thematically very effective. What makes the Straw Hats truly strong is their unshakable faith in one another, and it's something that's going to save them over and over again. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 122 is the beginning of The Turn, when the heroes find their footing and start to fight back. As Broggy despairs, Zoro, as ever determined to hurt himself, suggests that they cut off their trapped limbs and die fighting instead. And somewhat understandably, the fact that they're both clearly ready to do that freaks the Baroque Works agents the hell out. Well, except Miss Goldenweek, but she's a little different. Before any self-mutilation can actually happen, of course, Luffy bursts in with Usopp and Karoo in a genuinely spectacular, cartoon-ass panel. And this is a conspicuous vibe shift. The panels just before this are all blood and rage and grim anticipation and dark shadows, but Luffy's entrance is all rubbery, rounded limbs and exaggerated poses. It's goofy. It's a great way to make the audience feel the change in mood. And also, isn't it funny how, once again, people refusing to give up hope seems to be the trigger that causes Luffy to spawn into the cutscene? That's just good drama, of course, but, well, knowing where the story is gonna go eventually, I can't help but think. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 123, it's time to actually fight, and there's a lot of solid action here, like Luffy spinning on the dagger and poor Broggy's hand, for example, or Mr. 3 going flying after Luffy breaks his wax wall. Shout out also to the panel of Broggy screaming when Luffy is spinning on that dagger, by the way. Half of the face frozen in wax and the other half wailing. That is an uncanny image, and not an easy thing to draw, actually. Shout out also to the panel of Miss Goldenweek making her first move. The black background, the shadows over her eyes, and the little gesture of breaking a piece of cookie off as she says the attack name, that carries some real menace, especially after Luffy suddenly and inexplicably has refused to save his friends all of a sudden. Like, what's happening here? The best panel, though, is, well, it's this one, because it goes inexplicably hard on the artistry. Look at all this foliage in the foreground, how lush and rich and detailed it is. Look at the composition with Luffy windowed between the two trees, the spinning pumpkin in the background, and then Usopp and Karoo in the foreground, creating depth and layering to the perspective. This panel is almost totally unimportant to the actual storytelling, but it's a genuinely gorgeous art piece. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 124 is Miss Goldenweek's time to shine. The only time she's really gonna get, sadly, although I don't blame Oda for not wanting to have to write around her weird paint powers any more than absolutely necessary. I quite like the second panel of the chapter when Luffy seems just as perplexed and freaked out by the realization that he doesn't want to save his friends as they are. It's the way that his eyes are just ever so slightly unfocused and pure white while his skin is darkened with a screen tone. And yeah, that must be kind of a terrifying thing to experience, especially for him. I also like this panel where Usopp and Karoo knock Luffy over. That's just a solid little comedy beat, but the best panel is poor Usopp getting blown up by Mr. 5, because look at how that explosion is rendered. The stark, hard black shadows that make the explosion look like it's glowing, Karoo's eyes turned to blank white holes in his head, and the rough and scratchy rendering, and then Usopp taking the brunt of the blow, his form scratchy and ragged as well, reduced almost to a skeleton inside the blast. That's visceral, man. Don't worry though, he's fine. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 125, it's a prize fight, ladies and gentlemen. Ding, 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 ding. With Mr. 3 bringing out his giant robot form. And it's always funny that Luffy is so easily distracted by big, cool robot suits. And, same, honestly. Even if Mr. 3 looks more like a bloated tin toy than a Gundam. Sanji finally gets to do something too, sneaking into Mr. 3's base by accident. And we'll come back to that. But the best panel of this chapter is the splash page. The fountain of fire that results from Usopp's oil-soaked rope and Karoo's running around. This whole fight is a great example of how Oda writes Usopp to be useful, even when he's not strong enough to actually take down a bad guy. The Viz Media translation once again slaps a bunch of annoying sound effects over the artwork here, but look at the swirl and the curl of the Tower of Flame here, the delicate lines and the directionality of it, really selling the idea of a fire tornado exploding into existence. Look at the hard, three-dimensional shadows on Luffy and the Candle Champion and the beautiful action posing we get in this panel. Even out of context, this is just a beautiful piece of art. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 126 is the denouement of the fight, the final rout of the bad guys. Vivi and Nami save Usopp by bursting out from the flames, and their shadows rendered in the fire here look amazing. Look at the way the hatching curls up to give them flow and motion as they emerge. Usopp finally gets one over on Mr. 5 by simply lying to him, his superpower, setting Zoro up for a fiery finishing blow. And again, look how much flow and motion and drama Oda gets out of the flames licking his form. But as for the best panel, Mr. 3 tries to fool Luffy with his big wax museum bit, so we get these multiple panels with incredibly complex scenes full of figures and background detail, almost overwhelming with stuff to just take in visually. But then there's this panel of Luffy just lifting his foot, ready to kick, and here, there's no background at all, just a sheer white void. No complexity, no detail, just Luffy alone in the space of his instinct, taking the action that feels right, which he always does, no matter how complicated the problem in front of him might seem. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 127, Sanji gets to play spy, something I wish he got to do more often these days. He's chatting to the mysterious Mr. Zero, pretending to be his loyal agent, and he gets a couple of nice action panels dealing with the unluckies. I'm fond of the shots with Mr. Zero and the flower, too. The contrast between his gentle touch putting the flower in his water and the brutality of withering it when he gets annoyed. It's good teasing of his powers, too. This is one of those moments that you go back and look at and you go, oh, that's what that was, and I really like those. But the best panel, for my money, it's this one, of Dorry and Broggy hugging when it turns out that Dorry has survived. Again, the scale here is interesting. By keeping the eye line just above their heads and letting the trees rise over them, here, just for a moment, they look a little bit smaller than their environment, which supports the intimacy of the moment. And it is intimate. Broggy is on one knee, leaning into his friend's shoulder. This isn't a distant half-body bro hug, no homo. There is love there, deep care and affection, and I like that part of their relationship's portrayal. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 128 begins the transition from Little Garden to what's next, so there's lots of cooldown time, social fun, a check-in with Smoker who's hot on their tail, and Dorry and Broggy set up for their big farewell moment. Little Garden itself also gets one last send-off, another impossibly lushly rendered jungle environment around the Mary as it sails for the sea. And the final splash page is a strong contender for a best panel, because I know I've harped on about it a lot, but the scale on display here is amazing. The tiny Going Mary, the giants towering over the forest, and this pale-eyed beast rising like a mountain out of the sea. The Going Mary is even detailed really finely just to sell that sense of scale. You can see individual planks in the artwork if you look close enough. But the best panel? Usopp and Luffy staring bug-eyed at Vivi and eating rice cakes while she's berating herself for leading the crew into danger. It's funny, but it's also a visual demonstration that, yeah, the Straw Hats do not consider risking their lives to protect a friend a big deal at all. Not even Usopp. To them, that's just another Tuesday. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 129, one of Usopp's old lies comes true. What a funny coincidence, I bet that won't keep happening. It's a transitional chapter, which means a lot of dialogue and exposition, a little bit of backstory to wrap up Dorry and Broggy's arc, and the introduction of a new challenge to overcome, this being Nami's deadly illness. The panel of her collapsed on the ship is really good. Her head limp and her neck exposed, along with that clawed fist and the hair and chaos around her face. It all emphasizes vulnerability, weakness, and loss of control. You immediately get a sense of how serious this fever is. Bon Clay also shows up for the first time, and trust me, we will talk about him later, and the panel of Dorry and Broggy's broken weapons falling to the ground is a great thematic bookend to their long, pointless duel. But the best panel is the splash page. It's the Island Eater having a hole exploded through its belly and the Going Mary flying out. You can see the force of the blow carving a valley into the ocean, and that bending extends even to the horizon itself. This is how you depict a moment that shakes the world. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 130 is an important moment of characterization for Vivi specifically. Nami is sick with a rapidly climbing fever and clearly needs medical help, but she's also refusing and pretending to be in better shape than she is because Nami's read the newspaper and she shows it to Vivi. A huge number of soldiers have deserted in Alabasta, the balance of power is changing, and Crocodile's plan is coming closer to fruition. There's a ticking clock over her head now, and the question that the chapter asks is, what is Vivi willing to sacrifice to save her kingdom? Nami is more than happy to sacrifice herself for a speedier journey to Alabasta, but Vivi isn't, and sacrifice is a theme with her. It is important thematically to One Piece as a story that Vivi ultimately puts the people around her first. The mark of a good leader in One Piece is an unwillingness to treat other people like objects, like pieces on a game board. It's part of what makes Vivi a polar opposite to Crocodile, and what makes him a good antagonist to the saga. The best panel, though, is Vivi reading the newspaper as a vision of the rebellion darkens the background, the nightmare that she is imagining for her country. The soldiers are rendered heavily, with their faces darkened, looking almost like wraiths or zombies. It's grim, but what makes the panel for me is especially the newspaper itself. First of all, it's gorgeously rendered here, with Oda paying a lot of attention to its crinkled edges and the shape and weight of the paper, and all of that rendering is in service to a gesture. We see how the paper is crumpling under Vivi's grip, how her hands are tensing up and clenching with her emotional distress. It's a lovely bit of object work, a very evocative little acting choice that tells us what the character is holding back. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 131, we are introduced to the villain of this arc, Dear King Wapol, and his very cool, incredibly technically complex submarine ship, which gets a full dramatic unfolding sequence and then is never really gonna be relevant again. Ah, well, that's One Piece for you. The panel where its hull bursts through the water with the Going Merry dwarfed by it is especially gorgeous. There's a wonderful sense of twirl and flex describing the motion of the Merry on the wave. But yeah, anyway, that's not the best panel of the chapter. Moving on. Wapol starts eating the Going Merry, and boy, that poor boat is taking a beating, but the guys easily defeat his useless henchmen, and the best panel is this one, right as Vivi opens the door to see what's happening. First of all, I like the storytelling here. Sanji and Zoro are standing around casually, even in spite of the fact that Luffy is inside Wapol's mouth, because they know that this is a crew of weaklings and that Wapol ain't got shit on their captain. It's a reminder that the Straw Hats are, for the moment, still very overpowered for their journey. But the detail that makes it for me is that Vivi, opening the door, also slams it into the head of a henchman and knocks him out. It's such a small thing, a tiny little background gag that doesn't really matter, but I find these so incredibly charming. It's a lovely little reward for paying attention to the artwork, and this story arc especially is absolutely full of them. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 132 is kind of an embarrassment of riches when it comes to great panels. This one of Nami waking up in the night to see that the other Straw Hats are keeping vigil by her bed, sleeping uncomfortably on the floor rather than leave her side, for example, is a textbook application of show don't tell storytelling. Nobody needs to say it, right? You just get what the panel is saying. Similarly, the panels of Luffy physically restraining himself from leaving Nami's side even though he's so desperately excited to see the new island are good comedy, but also that's good characterization for him, that struggle between his duty to the crew and his childish impulses. Because see, as they arrive at Drum Island, the Straw Hats are greeted by a firing squad of hostile citizens who are not much in the mood to be hospitable to pirates, and Sanji and Luffy immediately escalate the conflict, leading Vivi to getting injured, and as Luffy is about to fly into a rage about that, she holds him back. She tells him to his face that he is a failure as a captain, that his job is to do what's right by his crew, not just by his own impulses. This is the story putting in quite a bit of work to demonstrate that Vivi takes leadership seriously as a duty, not just a privilege or a right, and it's an important lesson for Luffy to learn from her, which, to his credit, he does, and it's a repetition as well. This is an extension of that exact same lesson Shanks taught Luffy all the way back in the very first chapter. The crew comes first. But the best panel, it's this one, actually. It's this tiny little image of Vivi's blood dripping onto the deck of the Merry as she bows her head to beg for peace. Leadership comes at a price. The nature of leadership is sacrifice for the benefit of others. One Piece will return to this idea. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 133 is the classic storytelling structure that One Piece relies on. We've arrived on a new island, let's immediately split the party. Zoro's stuck on the ship, Luffy and Sanji are climbing a mountain to get Nami to the doctor, and Vivi and Usopp stay behind in the village to hear backstory from Dalton. And I'm quite fond of the panel of Luffy and Nami high-fiving as she decides to put her trust in her captain to save her. It's just, like, compare and contrast this with how much it took for her to trust Luffy back at Arlong Park, and that's character development, baby. But no, the actual best panel of the chapter? I think it's this one. It's Vivi and Usopp refusing to go inside to get warm because they want to stand there and look for their friends as they're departing. Again, it's a simple way to illustrate with action and unspoken feeling. They both so badly wish that they could go along and help. It demonstrates a deep well of care inside of them. But Oda also does something quite effective by completely dropping the background away in this panel and putting that big open space around the two of them. We are in Dalton's point of view here and seeing the Straw Hats as he's seeing them, and this is the moment that Dalton realizes that these pirates are people that he can trust, good people who care for each other deep down. And it's after this that he begins to open up about what will turn out to be part of his own rather traumatic backstory. The panel shows, in a very literal way, the moment that Dalton starts seeing the Straw Hats differently. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 134 is the introduction of Dr. Kuroha, who fucking rules, by the way, and good god, I should do a full video about her someday. But anyway, it's another classic One Piece plot twist as she turns out to not be on the giant ice mountain that Luffy and Sanji are climbing with Nami, but in the neighboring village instead, and uh-oh, the stakes just got raised. Then there's some decent comedy with Luffy and Sanji effortlessly dodging a baby snow bear rabbit's attempts to eat them until Sanji kicks the bear rabbit, which pisses off a whole herd of them that attacks, and uh-oh, the stakes just got raised again, and now Wapol has discovered the Drum Kingdom again and he's coming home to reconquer it. Oh no, the stakes, they're getting so high! The chapter is all about escalating the perils so that we must ask ourselves, how are they possibly going to save Nami in time? We know that they will, of course, but the thrill is in seeing the sheer impossibility of the odds they must overcome. As for a best panel, I don't know that this chapter really has any standout bangers, but I'm very fond of the panel of Dr. Kuroha looking a doubting man in the eye and simply saying, "Are you a doctor?" when he doubts her diagnosis. There's a balance to walk here to make her look confident and self-assured with an air of competence without spilling fully over into deceptive or condescending or evil. The panel is from the point of view of the shopkeeper, and she looks him in the eyes. It's straight on. There's no looking down her nose, no dismissal, no eye rolling. I almost get a slight sense of warmth from it. At least there's no coldness there. She knows that she's right, and she knows that he knows that she knows more than him, and that he will let her treat his son. And that is a really good way to introduce her as a character. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 135 is a classic rising tension chapter. Sanji and Luffy are getting into it with the rabbit bears, while Dalton, Vivi, and Usopp are trying to catch the doctor, and Wapol arrives on shore to start killing people, prompting Dalton to, oh my goodness, transform using a new kind of devil fruit, a Zoan, which we have definitely never seen before, wink wink. Continuing a theme of this chapter and this arc, Luffy has to keep his aggression and impulses in check. If he fights, Nami feels the impact, so all he's allowed to do is dodge. And I like that we see him struggling to do that. Much of pre-timeskip One Piece is also about Luffy learning to be a captain, to be a leader of a crew, and learning, in some ways, to grow up. As for a best panel, well, this one of Sanji and Luffy facing down the horde of rabbit bears is just a good piece of scene setting. Look at the way that Oda fades the monsters into the shadows in the snow, hatching them all in a uniform direction to match the direction of the wind. It gives a real sense of them being half obscured in a snow flurry somewhere in the background. It gives the scene an excellent sense of depth and menace. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 136 keeps the main theme of the saga going. What does it mean to be a good leader, to be worthy of command? And again, it reinforces its answer. A good leader is a servant of his people and puts their needs before his own, which gets demonstrated rather brutally with Dalton and Wapol. Wapol, the bad king, literally eats his own country. He eats his people, their houses, he consumes everything and makes it a part of himself because himself and his own power and glory is all that he really cares about. Never accuse One Piece of being subtle. Dalton, on the other hand, despite clearly having the power to take his long-awaited revenge, chooses instead to take some really big arrows to the chest rather than see even one of the people that he is sworn to be hurt instead of him. The panel where he falls over in the snow is beautifully composed with his people in the foreground, but the background kept completely blank, really emphasizing the impact of Dalton going down like that. The best panel, though, it's the avalanche. Of course, it's the avalanche. Luffy and Sanji as these tiny ants fleeing in front of what looks like a big soft cloud, but which is ripping trees to toothpicks as it's coming down the mountain. The scale and sense of weight and impact here is fantastic, and I like the stylization on the trees, rendering the snow on their branches by literally just making the trees outlines. It gives the landscape a stark, high-contrast character that really works with One Piece's black and white art style. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In chapter 137, it's snow time, baby! The rabbit bears have started an avalanche, and everyone is about to get buried. It's an action chapter, obviously, where Sanji gets to do a big heroic sacrifice, heaving Luffy and Nami off to safety while he crashes and gets buried. And we get to see Wapol pointedly, yet again, abandoning his own people the moment danger rears its head, including the very doctors who just saved him from the damage of Dalton's attack. Now, it's extremely tempting for me to say that this is the best panel. Rabbit bears fucking snowboarding on an avalanche using tree trunks, tricking in the air, and chasing Sanji and Luffy down. It's so fucking sick. It's such a great panel, compositionally, and also, where the hell else are you ever going to see anything like this? But no, the best panel is later. After the avalanche, the baby rabbit bear is scratching at the snow, desperately trying to pull its parent out of the snowdrift, and Luffy helps. These creatures have been trying to kill him and Nami and Sanji for the past 3 chapters, including dropping an entire mountain of snow on their heads, but Luffy helps. This kid is crying for their parent, and so Luffy helps. He doesn't say anything, he doesn't make a big deal out of it, no smug one-liner or profound statement of empathy, he just helps. Because he can. And the best panel is the one after that, where he trudges off into the snowstorm, a distant, shrinking figure slowly vanishing into the sleet. It's somber, almost quiet a little bit. There's nothing triumphant or glorious about it, just a man carrying his injured friends with nothing but their well-being on his mind. It hits. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In chapter 138, Luffy gets ambushed by Wapol and his henchmen, because of course he does. The stakes must always be raised, but not to worry, because themes. The rabbit bears show up to protect him in return for him helping them selflessly, which enables Luffy to start climbing the mountain and be inflicted with yet more themes. He climbs the rock face sheer and cold with his bare hands and feet until his fingers rip themselves to shreds. What does it take to be a captain, a leader? This is what it takes. You carry the weight of your friends when they need you, and it will cost you. This theme isn't the only thing Drum Island has on its mind, of course, and we'll get to the other bits, but it is hammering that part with some determination, because, well, that's how you pay off Alabasta eventually. The best panel in the chapter, though, it's the castle. It's the goddamn castle, but you must have known that. This is a contender for just straight up one of the prettiest illustrations in all of early One Piece. Amidst a landscape of curling snow fog and round snowflakes, boom, this Neuschwanstein-esque geometrically perfect castle rises like a mountain out of the landscape. The dark shadows carved into its surface give it three-dimensionality, and the pitch black of its roofs makes it a commanding, visually powerfully contrasting and dominant element in the panel composition, and it's just fucking breathtaking. What a gorgeous, gorgeous illustration, and visually speaking, what a way to pay off Luffy's slow, painful ascent up the slope of a frozen mountain. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 139 is our first real introduction to Chopper as a person and as a personality. And look, Oda has gone on record saying he initially did not want to design Chopper to be a cutesy mascot, but he was eventually won over by Ikue Otani's voice acting for the character and the art of animator Nobuo Koizumi, who was working on the anime. And when a character is voiced by Pikachu her goddamn self, I recognize that you have to have a heart of stone not to be won over to their cute side, but I really do miss the more Muppet-like and animalistic Chopper design from the early chapters. It had a really special charm about it that the more cutesy mascot version just never really has managed to match for me. Anyway, the chapter is also about building out Kuraha's character a little bit more, as she explains to Nami why she got sick and what must be done to cure her. And when Nami tries to get out of bed, Kuraha Well, Kureha gives a certain type of lesbian a sudden crisis is what she does, but the point of the scene is this. Kureha embodies the idea of being cruel to be kind. She's brutal, rude, uncompromising, and often violent, but always, always, always in the service of doing right by whoever she's caring for. And it seems to be the only way she has to express her care. This will come back. Remember this about her character for later. The best panel of the chapter, though, has nothing to do with any of this. It's Zoro, cold from a midwinter swim and being buried in an avalanche, who finds an enemy soldier wearing nice warm clothes, and Dush. Like, the composition here, the sense of scale and power, that entirely horizontal streak of blood and the dude's entire head deforming into a burger, it's just a really, really good smack. God damn, you can feel it through the page. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 140 is, would you look at the time? It's traumatizing backstory o'clock. Kureha outlines Chopper's long history of being rejected and abused for reasons that the poor kid simply can't understand, giving some context to why Chopper is acting the way he is around Nami. He is, at turns, intensely curious, won over in no small part by the selflessness that Luffy showed carrying Nami and Sanji up the mountain. That's the kind of friendship and intimacy that he craves. But also, he's absolutely terrified of admitting his interest or being vulnerable. It's a contradiction that's shown nowhere better than his adorable habit of rudely rejecting all forms of thanks and compliments while visibly being completely elated by them. This panel is a good bit of that storytelling. Nami on the bed and Chopper slumped against his books on the other side, and between them, this big, wide, empty gap, a distance which Chopper wants to close, but which also frightens him. Nami handles that by patiently waiting for him to build up the courage to come to her, while Sanji and Luffy, on the other hand, just actively chase after him like hooting idiots. The best panel, though, goes to Kureha, as she says, "Do you really think you people can heal his heart?" Healing the heart is another theme of this arc, of course, but look at her face in this panel. She maintains the Dr. Kureha impish, confident grin on her mouth, but the smile does not reach the eyes, which are lidded and staring away from Nami, who she's talking to, downcast as though her mind is somewhere entirely else. There's a contemplative, melancholic air to it, especially with the point of view pushed in so close to her and the background rendered with a dark screen tone. You get the sense that she's speaking about something dark and painful, even though she's visibly grinning. It's very good acting. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 141 is Oda straight up trolling us. Wapol arrives at his old castle to take it back, and Luffy charges Wapol to deliver an epic punch, and then cut to flashback. The action screeches to a total halt because it's backstory o'clock, and I hope you're ready to cry. This is our introduction to Hiriluk and the deadly wasting disease that's killing him, as well as his friendship with Kureha. They are two of a kind in many ways, and an interesting dyad in the story, but the important part of this chapter is Hiriluk's relationship with Chopper. In a world that has only ever shown Chopper violence and pain, Hiriluk is the first person to meet him with vulnerability. It takes the form of him posing naked in the snow, granted, but it is genuinely a beautiful gesture. It is a perfect expression of making sacrifices for the well-being of those under your care, which, as we've discussed, is the thematic heart of the entire Alabasta saga. But anyway, the best panel is Luffy winding up for the punch. I know it's not really related to what we were just talking about, but Oda's gesture work in this panel simply cannot be beat. He's rendering Luffy in serious mode, all rock hard and tensioned muscle and volumetric hatching on his limbs and clothes, and that sudden increase of realism in his design drives home the sheer power of the punch that's coming. But the realism is also contrasted with the utterly impossible extreme twist of Luffy's torso, contorted almost into a spherical shape. Note how the lines of hatching on his shirt follow the rotation of that sphere, and emphasize the tensioning spring and the explosive power that's about to get unleashed on Wapol's stupid face. The anticipation of this punch is supposed to be the reward that gets you through the backstory, and oh my god, does this drawing make you anticipate it. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 142 is, oh god, there's a lot going on here. So, this chapter focuses on the relationship between Chopper and Hiriluk. Chopper is a child and utterly impressionable, absorbing Hiriluk's idealism like a sponge, and Hiriluk is clearly overjoyed to have a son to pass his ideas on to. One particularly touching scene is the fight they have after Hiriluk uses Chopper to distract the kingdom soldiers because, well, they have a fight and remain a family. As Chopper says, this is the first time he's ever really had a fight. That's because this is the first time anyone has loved him enough to have a fight with him. a conflict that doesn't end in rejection and alienation and loneliness, but in reconciliation and love and... Okay, hold it together, Skyen, oh god. Now, despite already being a flashback, we get a flashback inside of the flashback because Oda is bringing plot threads together here. Dalton, as it turns out, met Vivi at a World Government Council and was astonished when she, a child of 10, chose to sacrifice her own feelings to protect the well-being of her people, in contrast to Wapol, who, in response to being embarrassed by Vivi's father, immediately picked a vulnerable child to physically abuse just to soothe his ego. Again, we see that major theme of the Alabasta saga in play. Leadership is sacrifice for others, and abuse of power is pathetic and contemptible. But then it's time to get back to the heartbreak, because Hiriluk suddenly and unexplainably turns on Chopper after a year together and breaks his promise that he would never shoot him and chases him away. And the best panel of the chapter is this one. Poor Chopper, having rammed his head into a tree, is holding his bleeding forehead and hoping, like a child might do, that maybe if he just hurts himself enough, then he will once again be worthy of love. And oh my god, Ichiro Oda, when I find you! Which are the best panels in One Piece? I have been reading One Piece on and off for a long time now. I have read and reread, especially the early chapters, everything before the time skip, probably over a dozen times at this point. I know the story by heart. I know exactly what's going to happen and when it is going to happen. It holds no surprises for me. But the 1-2 combo of Chopper, poor Chopper, beaten and bloodied with his broken antler and dragging his broken leg, holding out the mushroom which he thinks will save his father, with that expression on his face, and then Hiriluk only now in this moment fully understanding what he has come to mean to Chopper, only now in this moment fully understanding that he is Chopper's father, falling to his knees and holding him like that. Well, it doesn't always make me cry, but for this series, I have had to really take my time rereading the story and really think as deeply as I can about what One Piece is saying. So this time, rereading this moment, it broke me in fucking half. And it's all in the gesture here, isn't it? It's not just that Hiriluk is hugging him, it is how he's doing it. Not just holding him, but clutching him, lifting Chopper to his chest and almost enveloping him, becoming a shield, a shelter, a home. We don't see Hiriluk's expression in this scene. There's no wild One Piece caricature, there's no exaggeration, and there doesn't need to be. You get it. You see it, and you get it. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 144 is the flip side of the previous chapter. Chopper's deep love for Hiriluk has given him something he's willing to die for, but it's also given him something that he's going to die from, the poisonous Amiyotake mushroom. Chopper misunderstands the skull and crossbones because while Hiriluk has given him ideals, dreams, and determination, he has not given him an education. It is not enough just to do things. Practice must be backed by theory, or else there will be consequences. This is the dyad represented by Hiriluk and Kureha, two sides to a doctor's practice. Heart without head, and head without heart. It is those two philosophies that will be united and perfected by their adopted common son, Chopper. In this way, they complete each other, and certainly my interpretation is that Drum Island is also just a little bit a love story between Hiriluk and Kureha. Not necessarily romantic, but love nonetheless. The best panel of the chapter, by the way, is... oh god, it's this one. This little silhouette of a memory with Hiriluk's words. You found it for me? You can see that this is the moment that Chopper realizes just what his father has done for him. This is the moment that he understands that Hiriluk would rather die than hurt his son's heart by rejecting an act of love. Kureha is right, Hiriluk is a fool, but love is often foolish. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 145 is the end of the heart-destroying backstory flashback, thank God. Hiriluk is lured into a death trap, and the sheer act of his compassion and selflessness in walking into it visibly becomes the thing that moves Dalton to finally engage in open rebellion against Wapol. Hiriluk's farewell is also suitably thematic. He has found the cure to his disease, and even to the poison that he drank for Chopper, because as he says, when does a man die? When he is forgotten. So this is how he conquers death. This is his final victory over his disease. Because now he knows that his memory will be carried forever in the heart of Chopper. And this theme that we live on in everyone who carries our memories forward, and that it is remembering that gives people the strength to fight for freedom, this theme is core to One Piece as a whole. This is why the world government is so desperate to wipe out the memory of the Void Century. So keep it in mind, because it will come up a lot. It's a cheeky bit of foreshadowing, by the way, that we see Hiriluk make so many explosive failure potions in his big Florence flask chemical beakers, and now he pours himself a final drink from just such a bottle. So, boom. What a life it was indeed. But the best panel is the punch. Of course it is. The flashback ends with Wapol's stupid laughing face, and there is no more satisfying way to come back to the present than to see it caved in by Luffy's fist. Oda doesn't skimp on the impact here either. This is a really well-drawn goddamn punch. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 146 is finally the beginning of the fight with Wapol, and much-needed dramatic relief from the ringer that the story just put us through. Consequently, the stakes of the fight itself are pretty mild, especially compared to how high they usually are when the crew confronts the final boss of a story arc. Nami is already saved, Luffy is operating at full power, and Wapol is clearly no match for him. So now we just kinda get to have some fun with it, starting with some gags about Luffy's delayed processing and some hijinks involving Sanji, Chopper, and some static cling hair. It's fun. Now, there aren't really any banger panels in this chapter. It doesn't really need them that much, but I think this is probably the best one. Sanji staring down Marimo with his cigarette smoke cutting dramatically across his face. It's just a really nice composition, and you know, we'll have to have some words about Sanji's perviness as a part of his character at some point, but it is meaningful characterization that his chivalry extends to women he is not attracted to as well. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 147 is yet more fight with Wapol, with a little interlude to check in on Usopp, Zoro, and Vivi down in the village. I like that Usopp gets a genuinely heroic moment here, so moved by Dalton's determination to protect his village, something Usopp can relate to, that he offers to carry the man the entire way up the mountain. Anyway, Wapol is doing his Munch Munch factory nonsense and shoots at Hiriluk's flag, which leads to this genuinely amazing panel of the flagpole exploding. It's not an important panel, but the extreme deep perspective and foreshortening on the flag is a real technical tour de force as a piece of illustration that's a challenging angle to draw. The best panel, though, goes to the 20 Doctors. They have been faceless goons of Wapol up until this point, but now they insist on saving Dalton from his injuries. It's a simple little design trick, but the moment they decide to rebel against Wapol is also the moment they get their identities back. They take off their masks and coverings, and in doing so become people again. Individuals rather than faceless, identical pawns. It's good storytelling. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 148, do I even have to say it? You know which one it is, but it will take me the full 3 minutes of a short to fully talk about what that panel means and why it's great, and there are other things happening in this chapter which are worth talking about. So this is a two-parter, and you can find the other half in the playlist. So, Usopp has promised to carry Dalton up the mountain, and bless his heart, he is trying, but it's clearly not gonna work. Still though, even though it looks a bit silly, note that the visual language here isn't mocking Usopp for trying. The panel of his face with those dramatic shadows lighting it up is even framed as honestly kind of badass, which is why Zoro takes over. You can see him look at Usopp, understand what Usopp is trying to do, and then get annoyed because he respects what Usopp is doing. This compels him to help, and so now he has to carry the giant Oxman up the mountain. It really tells you something about Zoro's relationship to Usopp. Like, much gets made of his rivalry with Sanji, but like, that's big brother behavior right there, isn't it? I also want to call out the panel of Luffy stretching his arms to launch back into battle. Again, it's a really impressive deep perspective action shot over the castle. It just looks great. But also, when he lands, check out the deep, dark, shadowy way that he's rendered. The story has made it the point that Luffy really is just as much of a monster as Chopper is, and I really do like the somewhat creepy rendering of Luffy here after he has done something which is terrifying and kind of monstrous. Also, hey, that's a familiar looking smile, isn't it? Huh. Not saying it's actually foreshadowing for Wano, mind you, but it is a funny coincidence. Anyway, the last thing I want to call out is that Chessmaru will make a point out of mocking Chopper for being a lonely monster. And I just love that Luffy's battle cry as he jumps back into battle is the loudest and most earnest scream he can muster of, "I'm your friend!" It's just perfect. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In chapter 148, it's the unbreakable flag. Of course it is. What else could it possibly be? But in order to fully discuss it, I do need the full 3 minutes of this short, and there are other panels in this chapter worth discussing. So, this is a two-parter, and you can find the other half of this analysis in the playlist. Flags are not just flags in One Piece. They always represent meaning, but especially in the Drum Island arc. Hiriluk is the first person to articulate this, presenting the Jolly Roger to Chopper as an almost magical totem, the signifier both of Hiriluk's dream, but also his faith that his dream is possible. No disease is incurable. This is why when Chopper is begging Kuroha to take him on as an apprentice, he's madly waving that flag. Not just because he's carrying on Hiriluk's dream, but because he's making this the symbol of himself. I will make myself the miracle cure. Luffy continues this rhetoric. The skull and crossbones is a symbol of faith. This flag is a promise of life, which is an interesting duality, isn't it? A flag with a skull as a promise of life. That mixing of meanings is what led Chopper to feed Hiriluk the poisonous Amyudake, so it's a promise of life that comes with the threat of death. You put your life on the line for the dream that your flag represents. Also, note that when Luffy is jumping back into the fight screaming to Chopper, "You've got a friend right here," he's coming from Hiriluk's flag. Luffy too is made from faith. Luffy too is a promise of life. One Piece is a story in large part about political repression and tyranny, and the hopelessness and despair that is used to sustain oppression. The oppressor says, change is impossible, a better world is impossible, I am on top and you are cattle and this will never change. The oppressor sets the terms of what is possible and enforces those terms with violence. The Divine Dragons will embody this philosophy later, but Wapol has spent almost all of his screen time in Drum Island proclaiming the exact same shit. He's a king who eats his own country, parasitic scum with a superiority complex, and he is powerless to break the Jolly Roger. Hope, once it beats in someone's chest, faith in a better world, once it is kindled, it is unbreakable. By the way, remember this moment later in One Piece when a very different flag turns out to be a lot more fragile. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 149 is our introduction to Chopper's powers and a continuation of the theme of the story. Dalton is also a Zoan, just like Chopper is, and so Chessmaru is confident that they totally understand his powers. Zoans can only ever do 3 transformations. This is the limit of what is possible. But then, remember what the flag means. Chopper, unifying the faith of Hiriluk with the brains of Kuroha, has made his rumble ball, and he is no longer constrained by what is possible. He has 7 transformations, at least. And so what we get is a low-stakes chapter, not a dramatic fight, but a demonstration, and it is a lot of fun. I'm fond of the panel where Chopper is dodging axe strikes by shifting forms rapidly, and Luffy's total excitement at seeing what Chopper can do is charming as all hell, even if it does let Wapol get away. But the best panel is the Cloven Rose. Of course it is. Look at that f***ing punch. It is a simple white streak up the center of the panel coming from his fist. Not overwhelming, not bombastic, but precise, like a scalpel. It looks so good. Which are the best panels in One Piece? In Chapter 150, since Wapol isn't actually a threat in a fight, instead we're getting some comedy with a side of body horror. Seriously, as a kid, I felt disturbed at the idea of him eating himself like that. Ugh. He chases Nami around a bit and she gets to have a little awesome moment of her own, effortlessly pickpocketing the armory key away from him. I really do like how resourceful Nami is shown to be in this way. Like, he was never really a threat to her either. Hell, I think even Usopp could probably beat Wapol, frankly. But the best panel of the chapter is the snowbirds gently popping out of Walpole's stupid, over-elaborate cannon. They are here because Chopper, in his gentleness, has let them in and protects them, and there is something poetic in Walpole's ultimate weapon being totally undone by Chopper's gentleness. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 151 is the end of the fight with Walpole. Being a story for children, One Piece takes a few beats to make sure that the themes of the arc are explicit, with Dalton reliving his memories of Walpole's oppression and the courage of Hiriluk and Weedy, and shouting, "Who cares about power and order? A country should have heart." And as Luffy blasts Walpole's stupid head through the top of a tower, there is the Jolly Roger to witness his total defeat. And here, Kureha spells it out. The king has lost to the skull and crossbones. Oppression has lost to freedom. The best panel of the chapter, though, has something that's a little bit more subtle going on. It's not the launch of Walpole with the Gum Gum Bazooka, although that panel is epic with the foreshortening and the extreme pose, but it's right before that. It's the image of Luffy's hands stretching out over Drum Island with all the houses and the mountains below. Thematically, the panel makes Luffy an avatar of the island, and it is the country, the people, and the land who are throwing Walpole out. They are rejecting his authority. They are becoming free, and that is his ultimate defeat. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 152 has one last major foe to conquer, the true final boss of the story arc. Walpole is defeated, everyone's getting treated for their injuries, the day is saved, but, well, Usopp and the villagers see Chopper and immediately cry monster, and, well, there is a heartbreaking panel right after Chopper has shouted his insecurities. "I'm not human. I'm a reindeer. I have a blue nose. Everyone has always hated me. No one will ever want me. I'm a monster." And then he says, "Thank you for asking me, though." And he's there, tiny in the foreground with the Straw Hats as these shadows in the distance, dark and fading away from him. Like, you can see how Chopper feels in this moment. The panel tells it to you. But the best panel, and of course it is, the best panel is the splash page. Luffy isn't one for speeches, but you already know the theme of the story. Chopper has all these reasons in his head why being a pirate is impossible, why finding friends is impossible, and he's laying them out, and he's expecting rejection. But Luffy doesn't accept that. A better world is possible. Have faith. So shut up and come with us. It's the simplicity that makes it beautiful. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 153 is the final conclusion to the Drum Island arc and the final payoff to its set of specific themes, and it's also one of the few cases where Oda's art can't quite match his narrative ambition. But first, Chopper says goodbye to Kureha, or he tries to, anyway. Much like how Hiriluk was unable to face the pain of saying goodbye to Chopper and tried to drive him off with performative violence instead, so too can Kureha not face the pain of saying goodbye and instead reacts with performative violence. It's good characterization. Kureha and Hiriluk were always much more alike than she wants to admit. But Chopper also has a few final doubts as he's taking the Straw Hats away to leave. Is the impossible truly possible? Did Hiriluk really achieve his dream in the end? And so Kureha fires Hiriluk's final concoction into the sky, and the cherry blossoms of spring fall on an island of winter. Thematically, this is a fantastic moment, but the anime did this one better. The trunk of the mountain is supposed to become the trunk of the cherry blossom tree, but for my money, it just doesn't quite work without color. Oda does everything he can with amazingly elaborate cross-hatching in the sky, but the wonder of pink snowflakes just don't quite come through with only screen tones to shade it. Consequently, I think the best panel is Kureha tearing up as she watches Chopper go to leave. You can see how hard she's trying to hold on to her customary grin here, not to show the real feeling beneath. It's a good expression. You get what's going on. Which are the best panels in One Piece? Chapter 154 is the final chapter of Drum Island, and a classic transitional chapter setting up for what comes next. So, we get the mysterious appearance of a dark figure in a black cloak who seems to know Luffy. Ooh, whoever could that be? We see Mr. 2 looking for Mr. 3 on Little Garden, beloved Bon Clay is making his appearance, and we cut to a reminder that Crocodile is still lurking as the main villain of the next arc with Miss All Sunday by his side. There's a lovely moment when Chopper realizes Dr. Kureha actually packed his bags for him, and also the realization that he's having fun with friends for the first time in his life. Those are both touching, but the best panel is the party. Zoro and Sanji fighting, everyone toasting, Karoo drinking for some reason. Oda loves a big rowdy party scene, and this panel is full of energy, life, and joie de vivre. It's a perfect freeze frame to cap off this story.